Charles suddenly grew worried when he realized that the monster he had sent with Harper had died. Charles could use contracts to summon hellish creatures to fight for him. As long as he provided the creatures with enough sacrifices, he could make them remain in his reality and obey his orders. The ones he usually summoned were all from the bottom level of hell. Those kinds of creatures had no inclination to betray him, because their nature to obey was already branded into their souls. For that reason, he always arranged for a few hellish creatures to protect the people around him. Because Harper frequently protected Lena for him, he let her have a creature for protection. At that moment, though, he suddenly felt that the contract between him and the Dark Mage had been broken. Is Harper dead? He wondered. He paused for a moment, and then he reasoned. No, she's too smart for that. Just because her pet is dead doesn't mean she is. He calmed himself down, and then he asked Miranda, "Didn't Zach and the others go to meet the students? Can you send someone to check on them?" Seeing Charles so nervous made everyone feel uneasy and confused. They wondered why he was suddenly so concerned, and if he could really sense danger from so far away. Miranda quickly agreed. "I'll contact them now," she said. "The soldiers prepared a communicator for us." She didn't seem overly concerned about Zach and the others. She knew there were 4 paranormals in the team, and they were all at the 4th level. They could easily deal with ordinary dangers. She couldn't tell if there were any super-level monsters in the wild, but Zach and the others had saved the students, and they had seemed grateful for their help. However, when no one answered the communicator, she anxiously said, "I'm going to look for them." If anything happened to them, she knew she would blame herself. If she hadn't stayed to take care of Charles, she would have been with the students and might have been able to protect them. "I'll gather some of my people to help," Kevin told her. The communicator suddenly rang, and Miranda swiftly answered it. "How are you guys?" she demanded. "Are you all right?" The person on the other end of the line was Calvin. "We were attacked by the enemy," he said. "Harper used a monster as bait to lure them away. She even brought us to a safe hiding spot. We just escaped. I don't know if the people chasing us have left yet." Miranda let out a sigh of relief. "Where are you guys?" she asked. "I'll come and pick you up now." "I don't know where we are," Calvin replied. "We ran here because we were avoiding the monsters, but it wasn't a specific path. We're all hiding in a makeshift shelter, but it's dangerous to leave and look for landmarks." "We're 35 degrees southeast of the base," Harper chimed in. 2.36 miles away. The enemy is everywhere, and they have firearms. I think it's the same group that Charles encountered last time, and I think their target is the survival base. Tell everyone to prepare a defense." Miranda was stunned. "How do you have such precise coordinates?" But Harper replied, "There's no time to talk about that now. We need to keep our voices down as much as possible. If we manage to change location, I'll send you updated coordinates. Remember to take precautions. We're just their secondary target. We can wait. They're after you guys, and you'll have bigger problems than finding us in a few minutes." With that, she hung up the communicator. "I really feel like I've misjudged her," Miranda said. "She might be smart, but she's not a good strategist." Everyone considered she wasn't being particularly fair. They didn't know what had happened to the other group, and from what they understood, Harper had saved the group and had taken them to a safer location to hide. However, Charles agreed with Miranda. "I think that's true. Let's hope we're underestimating her. I hope her book smarts can translate into real-world practicality." Charles knew that being smart didn't necessarily mean that someone was practical. He wasn't someone who tended to judge others, but he believed that people who thought they were smart generally brought trouble to those around them. "Let's stop gossiping, shall we?" Kevin suggested. "The most important thing is to find and rescue them. I'll go and organize a search party." "No," Charles said. "You'll only lead the enemy to them. Greg, go and inform the soldiers to prepare for battle." "Yes, sir," Greg said. "Are you going to give up on Harper and the others?" Miranda asked anxiously. Charles shook his head. "If Harper was right and their main target really is us, sending out a large group of people to search for them will only put them in more danger. Then they'll take out Harper's group and ours. It'll be more effective if I go by myself." Miranda nodded. "Okay, I'll go with you." He didn't try to deter her. "All right, but don't make any noise while we're moving," he cautioned. "These enemies will be on full alert, and be careful of their firearms. Their equipment may not be as good as the Army's, but that doesn't mean they aren't dangerous or inefficient." "I'll come too," Olivia said. "I might be able to help." Her concern was obviously not for Harper and the others, but for Miranda. If the rescue was unsuccessful, she would do anything to keep Miranda safe. Charles glanced at her. "Your cloaking power is still too weak," he told her. "You can't take many people with you, and if you go, you won't come back. Miranda and I can move easily. I've made a breakthrough with my speed, and I promise I won't let anything happen to her. You don't need to worry." Once he had reassured her that they would be okay, he took out a map and asked Greg, "Where are we now?" He hadn't gotten his bearings since he had woken up. Although he knew a lot about the Alliance and the new base, he had neglected to ask anyone about their location. To him, being near the spring was the most important thing. Everything else was secondary. Greg pointed to their location on the map. "Here," he said. Charles punched the map furiously. "And we've been here for 3 days?" he asked. It was no wonder they had been attacked by Stellar technology, he realized. The Alliance's location was right next to the company's secret base. They were lucky they had survived as long as they had. It suddenly dawned on him that they were in big trouble. A high-ranking commander of Stellar Technology received a report from the front. He had directed several teams to launch a sneak attack on the suspicious base. When the teams had failed to respond, he had dispatched one of his lieutenants and a small squad of scouts to investigate. What they reported was nothing short of carnage. Every one of the covert teams had been eradicated. When he asked how they had died, he received a shocking answer. Fire, ice, wind blades, earth fissures, saber wounds, and sword wounds, his lieutenant listed. They all met a different end. Some received blows to their heads, and some were stabbed in the heart. In other words, it was likely they were attacked by more than 10 paranormals. The commander listened in surprise. One of the scouts hesitated, and then he said, "The team we encountered earlier only seemed to be a group of young people, but they were cunning. It looks like they managed to tell others about our arrival on location. I'm sorry, sir, but the surprise attack was a failure." Their original plan had seemed to be a good idea. They hadn't anticipated running into such a large setback so quickly. "Why weren't our other teams attacked?" the commander asked. "Maybe the enemy didn't find them?" the scout suggested. The lieutenant interjected. "I've just received a report from the group investigating the enemy's base. He said the enemy's fortress is already on full alert, but it's a little chaotic. Apparently the enemy is testing us, and they even look like they're planning on a counterattack. He said they didn't expect us to attack from 5 different directions. Because of the dark, they don't even know how many people we have." "That's good," the commander said. "Since the planned surprise attack failed, let's prepare to attack directly. Withdraw the troops from around the enemies and send them to the enemy base. Tell them to ready themselves to attack on command. Keep a few groups here to finish off the small group that killed our people. That way, the rest of them will lose their backbone and submit." "They aren't regular soldiers," the lieutenant warned him. But he agreed that using the enemy's fear against them was a good plan. If they could keep the base in chaos, they stood a better chance of winning. Suddenly, a message came through on the lieutenant's old mobile phone on his waist. He frowned as he read it. "Not good news, sir," he reported to the commander. "The troops have all left the suspicious camp and are nowhere to be seen. Our spies who were following them have also been killed. Where did they go? Could they be preparing to ambush us?" "No," the commander replied. "If they were preparing to ambush us, they would have run into our troops on the other side." He was content to allow his people to face off against the military to buy his other team some time. He had exchanged 1/5 of his people for regular army soldiers, which he had thought to be a good trade. "It's the only way," the commander said. "Speed up the troops from other directions as much as possible, but be careful to hide their tracks. They might not have been discovered yet." The lieutenant delivered the commander's orders. "Prepare for defense," the commander said. "If the enemy has sent more than 10 paranormals, they'll have them heavily guarded to keep them safe. They're most likely preparing an attack. When they do, they'll expose their paranormals. As soon as you see them, attack immediately." Pleased with the commander's idea, the lieutenant remarked, "That's an outstanding idea, sir. I think we'll get through this with minimal losses." Neither of them doubted that they would win. The commander reminded him, "We still need more experimental subjects, so try to take as many of them alive as possible." "Don't worry, sir. We can do that. If we kill a few who initially resist, the others will definitely surrender." The lieutenant was excited about the prospect of following out the order. He had been in this position for a long time, so long that it had become a source of embarrassment for him. He longed to climb the corporate ladder as much as possible, and he believed that if he made a good enough impression on the commander, he might be able to move up the ranks to captain. As the commander and the lieutenant plotted, Charles returned to Miranda, and the two of them left what remained of Stellar Technologies' army and headed to Zack and Harper's hiding place. They were glad that only the two of them had gone on the rescue mission, because they managed to find the spot in no time at all. Having more people would have only taken more firepower away from the base. "Do you think they're still in here?" Miranda asked. "Or do you think they've already moved to another location?" She looked at the building in front of them and pointed out a marking on the door. It was a zombie claw mark, and it indicated there were likely zombies inside. She doubted that Zack and the others had been injured by a few zombies. The creatures weren't known for their intelligence, and Zack and Harper were more than a match for them. However, a new thought occurred to Charles. "This is probably the reason they haven't been discovered," he exclaimed in excitement. "If they lured some zombies here to mark their hiding place, no one would think to search it. I take back what I said earlier. Harper really is brilliant. Alright, we better check it out. I think they're in the basement." Zack was fairly intelligent. He had always been the best at learning and research, but his survival knowledge and overall trusting personality meant that he didn't have the best survival instincts. When it came to Harper, however, Charles seemed to have been wrong in thinking she lacked practical skills. He considered that he hadn't given her enough credit for her quick thinking and street smarts. It seemed that she and Zack made a great team. Miranda didn't know how Charles had come to the conclusion the zombie mark was effectively a fake, but she didn't doubt his intuition. "Zack, Anthony," she called out as loudly as she dared. "Are you guys in here?" A dark figure emerged from the basement with a torch in its hand. "It's Miranda and Charles," the figure cried, revealing itself to be Harper. "Everyone come out!" More than 20 people came out of the basement in cheerful surprise. "Miranda, Charles!" Anthony exclaimed. "I knew you'd come and save us." Zack came out with the others, holding Harper's hand tightly. Miranda looked at Zack and Harper's interlaced hands. "I'm glad you two finally had a talk," she said with a grin. "I was worried you'd never get together." Zack's face turned red. Even though he was a paranormal, he had always remained humble. He didn't have the arrogance and overconfidence that usually came with being superpowered. Instead, he had an endearing innocence. "It's all thanks to Zack and Harper that we're alive," Dale said. "Harper came up with an idea to get zombies to mark the door. Otherwise, we wouldn't have made it this long. The Stellar Technology people have guns. If we make a run for it, the paranormals can probably escape, but it might be more difficult for the ordinary people." Calvin also seemed to be full of admiration for Harper and Zack. "Yeah!" he exclaimed. "Harper told Zack to use his powers to control the zombies and use them to mark the door. Then he took care of the creatures as though they were nothing. Harper and Zack are a full-on power couple." Zack looked even more bashful. He had always been an introvert who focused on his studies, and he had never cared much for dating. Once he had become a paranormal, there had been a lot of women who had suddenly shown an interest in him, but their attention had only made him feel even more awkward and uncomfortable. Only Harper had seemed to have been unintimidated by the changes in him. She hadn't made a fuss, and she had simply helped and encouraged him like a good friend. Although she hadn't ever overstepped their friendship, she had always tried to take care of him and make sure that he knew not everyone was only interested in him for his powers. In turn, he had never felt shy around her the way he did around other women. He felt as though he could talk to her, and he was always intrigued by her mind and her ideas, which were similar to his own. When they had found themselves in danger, they had thought that they would lose against so many armored troops, or at least lose a lot of people. However, Harper, who wasn't a paranormal yet, had stepped forward and led the way. She had brought everyone to a safe place, and when they called for help, she had instantly determined their precise location. Zack felt lucky to have met such an incredible woman, and when she had worked with him to use the zombies to create a safe hiding place, he had finally revealed his feelings to her. Harper's face was also slightly red, but she wasn't embarrassed in the slightest. Instead, she got right to the crux of the problem. "Charles, do we go back to the base or stay here and fight?" she asked. "These guys are just kids, so we didn't really have a choice before." But since you've come to help us, we can probably use our numbers to our advantage." "Of course we'll fight back," Charles said. "But you guys have to be careful of Stellar Technologies' guns." One of the students seemed to be confused. "But there are so few of us," she said. "Can we really fight back? They have paranormals and firearms. We can't match that." "The fear people have toward firearms is deeply rooted in their bones," Calvin said, shaking his head. "Even well-trained people sometimes can't even pull a trigger on a battlefield, let alone people from a technology company with no experience. If you don't want to take such a small risk, do you think you have what it takes to be part of the Dawn Alliance? We don't take people who aren't prepared to fight." The student muttered in a low voice, "I'm just pointing out the obvious. Why didn't I listen to Miranda?" Miranda explained to Charles, "Many of these kids offered their homes to us when they found out we were going to save other survivors. They wanted to come and help search for survivors last time, but I said no, because they were too young." Charles nodded. He knew the young people weren't selfish. They were just scared kids who wanted to help. It had taken a lot of courage for them to risk their lives to find survivors. He knew it wasn't fair to assume that everyone, especially teenagers and young people, would be willing to do so much. He acknowledged that overcoming their fear had its own merits, and it was a kind of courage that was hard to come by. Charles patted each of the young people on the head. As soon as he touched them, they began to emit a golden light. In answer to their puzzled expressions, Charles said, "As long as the golden light is glowing, it'll repel normal bullets. When we reach the survival base, you won't be expected to be fighters. You just need to do the supporting work." They curiously touched the golden light surrounding their bodies. "Can paranormals increase other people's shields?" one of them asked. "That's amazing." "I heard Harper and Zach talking about you, but I didn't know you were this powerful," another added. They didn't know much about paranormal abilities, so they were all delighted and surprised. Charles was amused at their remarks. Usually, when people realized that he was different from other paranormals, he had to put up with a lot of judgment. It was refreshing to be around people who had no expectations or envy of his power. He decided he wanted to save as many of them as he could. "All right," he said. "Let's prepare to fight back. Everyone move out, don't make a sound, and listen to my instructions." Harper will send an update on the situation to Olivia. He took out several sets of black clothes from his energy storage space and handed them to a few of the students who were dressed in bright colors. "Put these on," he said. "It'll reduce the likelihood of being discovered and make you a harder target." Due to the failure of most electronic devices in the new era, much of the long-distance infrared equipment was all but useless, making it harder for Stellar Technology to detect people from far away. Once the students had changed, Charles placed them at the back of the group. But just as everyone was eager to go and the few paranormals were about to move out, he gestured for everyone to stop. "Is there a problem?" Miranda asked in a low voice. "They've stopped," Charles replied quietly. "Maybe they're afraid of us," she suggested. "If that were the case, they'd either retreat or attack," he said. "But they're not doing anything. Why aren't they even changing their formation?" Everyone else seemed to realize that something was wrong, but they couldn't think of a reason that would explain the enemy's lack of movement. "They might be waiting for something," Harper said anxiously. "That's not good. Charles, did you tell everyone at the base to be on alert and prepare to counterattack? If Stellar Technology sends people from their other teams there, then our base might be in danger." Charles nodded. "I've already arranged it," he assured her. "Just stay with Zach for now. You don't have to worry about strategy. I told the Alliance leaders to hide. Stellar Technology won't attack recklessly if they can't find them. They want to make an example of them." Harper was glad he had thought to arrange everything so swiftly. She was privately glad that she wasn't expected to lead the charge again. She had faith in Charles and Miranda, and she was more than happy to take her place at Zach's side. She looked at Zach and felt her heart surge with excitement. Harper had always admired Zach's personality, which was why she had chosen to pursue him. However, she was also a good judge of character. When she had been at college, she had always been the first to realize when people had an ulterior motive. Her radar was equally competent when it came to men, and she had always been picky when it came to dating anyone. It was important to her that she found a person she could truly trust. When she had met Zach, she'd been attracted by his quiet ways and soft voice. He wasn't the type of guy who fawned over women. showed off, or flexed his strength. He had a rare, pure heart. She knew that he was a good man who would do anything for her. She liked that he wasn't someone who would worship her beauty. It made her admire him even more. Their personalities complemented each other, and in such a dangerous world, she felt they were a match made in heaven. Her only concern had been whether Charles would think she had ulterior motives and stop her from pursuing Zack. After all, he treated Zack like a brother. But once Charles had given them his approval, she had felt as though a weight had been lifted. She had been nervous because if he hadn't approved, he might have succeeded in splitting them up. He always got his way. He was a formidable force. Miranda's voice interrupted her thoughts. "What can we do?" she asked Charles. "If there are other teams, should we warn the others back at home base?" Charles thought about it. "Olivia's smart," he said. "She'll definitely gather the Alliance leaders and prioritize their protection. If she needs to, I know she'll make sacrifices. Likely the newer recruits. All we need to do is tell her to focus her attention on this direction and wait for us to take care of the situation here." Charles had never treated the members of the Alliance equally. He had the most faith and loyalty to those who had followed him for the longest time. Those who had joined after his defeat of the Hive Queen would need to work hard to gain his trust. He knew Olivia would put the old members before the new just as he would. He had planned to test the loyalty of the newer recruits, but he had been taken by surprise when he had realized their base was practically at the entrance to stellar technology. It had definitely thrown a wrench in his plans. He knew there were likely to be many casualties in the inevitable battle. Since there was no way to avoid it, the only thing he could do was reduce the harm to his most loyal followers. "All right," Harper said. "I'll tell her to attack from the front." As Harper began to inform Olivia, Charles arranged jobs for everyone else. "Zack," he said, "you need to fight fire with fire. Use large amounts of hellfire as you need to. If the enemy sends armored vehicles, Dale's earth power will stop them." Zack and Dale nodded. Charles took out some guns and sniper rifles, and he quickly instructed the students without superpowers. "The rest of you, start shooting," he told them. "But be careful not to shoot randomly. Try to hit the enemy by holding your gun at 30 degrees. "Isn't that the shooting method for a bow and arrow?" Calvin asked. "If the gun's pointed at 30 degrees, it'll be out of range." The bullets were very fast. Although the guns didn't fire in a completely straight line, the arc wasn't overly large. Compared to a bow and arrow, it was a huge difference. Will aiming that high really hit the enemy? Calvin wondered. "Do you think shooting a gun is easy?" Charles asked him. "Are you really expecting kids who've never touched a gun before to be able to shoot like they're in a movie? I told them to use that method, not to kill the enemy, but to prevent them from hitting each other." He could tell that some of the students looked unconvinced, so he said, "Anthony summoned the death spirits to protect them. Also, you should supervise them. If there's any friendly fire, I can guarantee they'll never use a gun again." Miranda supported Charles. "I don't want you all to think that using guns is easy and fun," she said to the students. "I bet that even if we gave you something as simple as a knife to use, you'd still somehow manage to either get disarmed or hurt yourselves with it." The students' faces turned red. They weren't necessarily clumsy, but they were in awe of the incredibly dangerous weapons they had been given, and their excitement would quickly turn into carelessness if they didn't keep it in check. Once Charles had delegated all the tasks, he pointed at a building in front of them and said to Miranda, "Your task is to hide in there and cover this area here. If the enemy manages to break through Zack and Dale's blockade, you need to ambush them." Then he solemnly reminded the youths, "Miranda's position is right in the line of fire. If your aim is off by too much, you could seriously hurt her." "Then why would you put her in such a dangerous place?" one of the students said angrily. "Why don't you ambush them yourself? Also, are you sure that the ambush here will work? Won't the other guys be smart enough to send someone to investigate?" "The stellar technology people don't have a clue how to conduct an investigation," Harper replied. She had already completed her tasks and returned to the middle of the group. "Since you're all shooting, the enemy isn't going to expect an ambush from the middle of the firing range. If you're really worried about Miranda's safety, then make sure you don't make any mistakes." Miranda also addressed the group. "In this dangerous world, no one's safety is guaranteed," she told them. "No one will be there to protect you, and you can't expect others to have the courage to put you before themselves." She finished her speech, and then she moved into position in the center of their group. Charles handed a submachine gun to Harper and said, "Teach them to shoot properly, and choose a suitable ambush location. I'll leave the rest to you. I have another job to do." Then he hurriedly disappeared into the night. Harper said to everyone, "If you want to live and save your friends, then listen to me." Zack looked at Harper and smiled. He was ready to fight. He raised his hand, and flames began to fall like raindrops in their enemy's direction. "We're under attack!" When the flames began to rain down from the sky, the entire Stellar Technology Army descended into a state of panic. However, they quickly regained their composure and began to organize themselves in an orderly manner. Despite the shock, they had known there had been the possibility of an attack. Most of them were mentally prepared. The paranormals in the team sprang into action, employing an assortment of elemental defenses. Some of the people with guns began to fire in all directions, and they heard a series of screams echo around them. However, the screams belonged to their own people. When they raised their guns to shoot, the commander had hidden himself in an armored vehicle and had issued his orders via a liaison officer. "These idiots are useless," he thought disdainfully about his own troops. "If we encounter any setbacks, who knows what they'll do? It looks like they're going to take out all our own people." Although their equipment was impressive, it was useless in the hands of people with no skill. They didn't lack bullets, but he needed to know that at least a majority of them were hitting a desired target. "I'll just have to settle for inaccuracy and hope there's enough ammunition to take out a few of the enemies," he realized. "In any case, they'll be afraid of the firearms." "We should send a squad of paranormals to deal with this small band of rebels," the lieutenant suggested over the communicator. "There's no rush," the commander replied. "Let's confirm the enemy's position first. Their flames don't seem strong, but we shouldn't underestimate them. They seem to cover a large area." Suddenly, a series of exclamations erupted from their team. "What's that over there? The captain is dead! It's a fire dragon! That's an attack from a 5th level paranormal!" Once again, there was disorder among the ranks. The screams and gunshots were incessant. It had been more than 20 days since the apocalypse had begun, and since then, they had learned a great deal about paranormals. Dragon energy and dragon-shaped flames were clear indicators of 5th level paranormals. The Stellar Technology fighters were worried because the enemy obviously had at least one powerful expert in their ranks. Their entire company only had 2 people at level 5, and they assumed they were up against at least one incredibly powerful fighter who might be waiting to ambush them at any moment. The commander's face paled, and he asked for an update on the situation. The soldier reported, "Sir, the enemy used a fire dragon to kill 3 of our paranormals. All the rest of our paranormals have refused to use their superpowers to protect us. They said they're going to protect themselves instead." The commander was furious. He considered it a despicable, cowardly move. To him, all paranormals were high and mighty, especially those at level 3, because they were able to withstand the power of bullets. Many of them thought themselves the equivalent of superheroes or gods. They had been instructed to protect the other members of the team because they had the strength to do so. However, when they saw the fiery dragon attacking paranormals with seemingly unstoppable force, they naturally didn't want to be next in the firing line. They considered sacrificing themselves for weaker people to be a fool's errand. "This is the problem with not having trained soldiers," the commander grumbled. "Pass on my orders. Have the paranormal team move in immediately and prepare to kill the enemies. I want at least 5 level 4 bio-altered paranormals plus some elementals. That shouldn't be too much of a problem." If they had been an official army, the paranormals would have had no choice but to complete the mission, even if their lives had been in danger. But as it was, they had decent equipment, but they lacked the honor and finesse of members of more organized forces, and their first instinct was to save their own lives. Several of them had run away to find a place to hide, deciding that since it was late at night, no one would notice they had left the battle. Even though Stellar Technology had powerful paranormals, their makeshift army was still a mess. Charles counted 26 paranormals, although some weak ones didn't seem to be making any moves. "They really have a lot of paranormals," he thought. He stood on the roof of a 6-story building, observing the situation below. Before he had passed out, the Dawn Alliance had around 200 paranormals, but only around a dozen of them were at level 4. However, Stellar Technology had sent more than 10 level 4 paranormals just to deal with this small team. If this is just one team, how many paranormals do they have in total? He wondered. It looks like they've already managed to develop some results. Although they don't give us more than a 70% chance of success, I have to make a move on them. A murderous glint flashed in his eyes. He didn't know much about the early stages of Stellar Technologies' operation, and he had never realized in his previous life how quickly they had progressed. Even the regular army couldn't compete with them, not because they were weaker than them, but because the price they would have to pay was too high. It wasn't worth sacrificing so many good soldiers. As Charles plotted his next move, Zack covered the enemy with a blanket of fire. Naturally, he couldn't cause too much damage to the powerful paranormals. In fact, he thought there might not even be many casualties at all. When Charles had managed to reach the 3rd level, he had considered the fire dragon technique to be a big move. When he reached the 4th step, though, he found he had firm control over the beast, and he could summon it to his fingertips with ease. He saw the Stellar Technology fighters approaching him and decided to ignore them. Instead, he released a few more fire dragons. Then he released some less menacing-looking fire snakes. The approaching Stellar Technology paranormals were overjoyed. "He doesn't have any more fire dragons," one of them said. "Looks like his power is almost used up." "Do it now! Here's our chance!" But some of the team members felt it wasn't safe to act. They wanted to wait until Charles's energy was depleted. "Wait a minute," one said hesitantly. "The fire snakes are still pretty scary." One of the captains brandished a long spear and shouted, "You're a paranormal! Would you retreat before all of your energy was used up?" His subordinates immediately ceased their complaining. They all knew that if their opponents were advanced fighters, they would never risk their lives by using up all of their energy. "If I were him," the captain said, "I would at least save enough energy to release the fire dragon. When we ambush him, he's obviously going to use it. If we use all of our elements, we should be able to block it." If the elemental paranormals help the bio-altered paranormals, their combined strength might be enough to kill him. Therefore, they prepared to let the elementals simultaneously block Charles's dragon. The bio-altered paranormals would then strike and deliver the fatal blow. Their strategy was simple, and in theory it was highly effective. In such a tense environment, the effectiveness of the plan was more important than skill. The bio-altered paranormals entered the building where Charles was hiding. They moved carefully and slowly. Every time they reached a new floor, they looked around. They didn't know whether the level 5 paranormal they were hunting had someone with him for protection. They knew if it was them, they would have taken someone for support. Although they weren't trained soldiers, they still knew to be cautious. When they reached the 5th floor, the captain hissed quietly, "Do it!" An earth-powered paranormal made his move, cracking the ceiling, which was the floor of the 6th story. The 6th floor came crashing down, and a black figure appeared in their field of vision. All the paranormals except the captain leaped up and attacked simultaneously with their blades, instantly cutting the black figure into several pieces. The paranormals jumped around in excitement. They couldn't believe they had managed to take out such a strong enemy so easily. "We got him!" The captain heaved a sigh of relief and said to the fallen enemy, "You might have been more talented than us, but talent is wasted without brains." He decided the surprise attack had been a complete success. Their enemy apparently hadn't realized there were so many of them. He also thought it had been clever to remain on the 5th floor and break the ceiling to destroy the 6th floor. He was pleased with his own cunning and quick thinking. In this new era, there's a new way of fighting, he thought. If people's thinking is limited to how they did things in the old days, it doesn't matter how strong they are. It's a battle of brains. One of the team members picked up the severed head of the fallen paranormal. "It would have been better to capture such a high-level paranormal alive," the captain remarked, "but we'll certainly get a lot of credits for killing such a powerful enemy." They all knew how terrifying the level 5 paranormal had been in a battle. They had experienced his power firsthand when he had attacked all of them initially. If they hadn't taken him out, they were sure he could have killed their team of over 1,000 men on his own. One of the other team members checked the roof and returned to the group. "I'd expected such an expert to come up with a better plan," he commented. "He didn't seem to be prepared at all. It's a bit disappointing, really." But at that moment, the paranormal holding the head screamed, and the hand that was touching the head had erupted in black welts. "Quick, throw it away!" cried the captain. The paranormal, still crying in pain, hurriedly launched the head away from him, but it was too late. The black sores had spread over his entire body, and they were swelling fast. "Help me!" he cried in a hoarse voice. He reached out his hand, which was now in a terrible state, toward one of his colleagues. However, all the other paranormals leaped away from him in disgust. None of them had any idea what the strange sores were, but they instinctively knew that if they touched them, they would likely end up in the same situation as their miserable friend. The captain suddenly understood what was happening. "This is a trap!" he exclaimed. But his realization had come too late. A huge fire dragon flew in from the window and engulfed everyone. There were collective shouts of surprise and terror. "What's going on? I thought he was dead! Who did we kill? Quick, get out!" The sudden appearance of the dragon made everyone lose their minds. They began to attack at random, trying to extinguish the fiery creature. They had barely begun to attack it when they saw something that made their hearts stop. 2 more fire dragons had joined the first. "This is impossible," whimpered the captain. "Even a level 5 paranormal can't release 2 fire dragons at once." "Maybe there are multiple level 5 paranormals with fire powers," one of the others suggested. The captain's eyes filled with despair. Then he saw a figure floating in the air outside the window. "He can fly?" the captain shrieked. "This isn't a level 5 at all." He was scared to death. Although he didn't know the level an expert had to be able to fly, he knew that this person wasn't an enemy he could fight with only a small group of untrained people. The captain smashed his way through the nearest wall with his spear and jumped from the building. He decided he would rather take his chances with the fall than face the terrifying dragons upstairs. He knew he was a coward for running away, but he figured that as a level 4, he was likely to obtain merely a sprained ankle from the fall. He could then try and escape on foot. However, when he jumped, he inadvertently landed in a swimming pool outside the building, which cushioned his fall. Thrilled by his good luck, he began to swim to the other side to get out, but he was overcome by a bone-piercing chill. The pool had turned into ice around him, and he was literally frozen in place. He saw the dark figure jump from the 5th floor and land neatly at the side of the pool, and he felt in his bones that something was wrong. The man's fall seemed incredibly slow and somewhat stilted. Then the captain realized he had been tricked. He smiled bitterly. "It's a rope," he said. "You're using a rope." In the panic and confusion, they had all thought they had seen Charles fly. None of them thought that he had tied a rope to an object on the roof and then belayed himself down the side of the building. He had appeared to hover outside the window on the 5th floor as he had launched his attack. But in the dim light, they had simply seen his silhouette hovering 5 floors above the ground. "I surrender," the captain said pleadingly. "It's to your benefit to keep me alive. I have a lot of information about stellar technology. If you're willing to join us, you'll be treated as an honored leader. I'm willing to be your subordinate." The captain was a level 4 paranormal, and he believed that his offer of surrender and loyalty made him worth keeping alive. He also fully believed in the strength of stellar technology. He was certain that if he could emphasize the company's strength to this man, he would be tempted to join. "Don't waste your last breath," Charles said. Then he activated the power of thunder and absorbed the paranormal's energy. His motivation for killing the man instead of capturing him wasn't because he considered the captain inferior to him, and it also wasn't his concern that he would betray him at some point in the future. His primary reason was laziness. He didn't have the time to deal with captives and educate them. He decided he might as well absorb their strength. Once he had dealt with the captain, Charles raised his hand and summoned another fire dragon, which flew toward the residential building. After witnessing their own captain's insubordination, the remaining paranormals followed his lead and began to launch themselves from the building. They fell like stones, but Charles intercepted each of them on the way down. From the moment the soldiers had panicked, Charles had no longer considered any of them a threat. The body he had released in the building as a decoy had only been a level 2 hellish creature. In an era when everyone's combat experience was minimal, if not entirely non-existent, it was easy for people to fall for traps. Less than 2 minutes later, the battle was over, and the entire residential building lay in ruins. In the slightest hint of wind or rain, it would completely disintegrate. Once Charles replenished his soul energy, he checked his level. 4th level, 3rd order. While Charles was finishing off the group of paranormals, his remaining enemies were panicking on the battlefield. The flames Zack had conjured in the sky were endless, and it seemed as though the Alliance's energy couldn't be depleted. Then the Stellar Technology soldiers heard gunshots, and they began to speculate. They have guns too. Maybe they have people from the army on their side. What are you afraid of? We have loads of paranormals. But despite the knowledge that they had paranormals, they all remained frightened. It was now late at night, which was advantageous for the Dawn Alliance, because the Stellar Technology fighters had no idea how many of them there were. In the blink of an eye, they had gone from assailants to victims. I didn't expect them to circle behind us and send a second team to surprise us, the commander said through the communicator. But at least we have a lot of paranormals. Most of the paranormals he had sent to kill Charles were 4th levels, and a few of them were at the peak of the 3rd level. But 4th level paranormals were a rarity. They were people who had mastered many techniques, and there weren't many of them. They did have a lot of paranormals at levels 2 and 3, and they had more than 100 paranormals in total, who were scattered among the 5 teams. We need to wait for them to kill the level 5 paranormal before we act, the lieutenant told the commander. Otherwise, we're just wasting our energy. Are you saying that we might lose? The commander asked. Of course not, he replied. After all, we have many things to our advantage. We won't lose. That's good, the commander said. Anyway, there are plenty of people in the country. If we lose people, we'll just catch some more survivors. Last time we caught more than 30,000 people. They're all replaceable. The lieutenant flinched at the suggestion, and the commander seemed to notice. I respect and admire your ability, the commander said. The only thing that's holding you back from advancing in the ranks is your tactical skill. You place too much emphasis on human life. We're living through the apocalypse. Your vision for battle needs to change with the times. Stellar Technology had made considerable progress in their research on biomechanical beasts, which were also known as cyborg beasts. But in terms of power, they'd encountered a roadblock due to the failure of their previous operation. However, it was still possible for them to transform ordinary people into cyborg beasts and give them steel-like bodies. If they could make themselves indestructible, they wouldn't need to worry about anything else. The lieutenant hesitated for a moment while he decided on a course of action. Then he gritted his teeth and ordered, I want teams 5 and 6 to work with the paranormals to eliminate the main threats. If anyone has to be sacrificed, I want it to be ordinary people. If there are any paranormal casualties, I'll be incredibly disappointed. The 2 teams swiftly began to move into formation. There were around 300 people between them. The levels of the paranormals in these teams were relatively low, and they needed some help to ensure they were protected from the fire. As the teams rolled out, they saw a burning building in the distance. The building their paranormals had chased Charles into. Go and see what's going on, the lieutenant said worriedly. According to our tests, the commander said reassuringly, even a 5th level paranormal can't deal with so many level 4s launching numerous attacks. The outcome of the battle is already determined. At most, 1 or 2 of them might die. I don't want to lose even 1 level 4 paranormal, the lieutenant replied. Every level 4 is precious. This is what I was talking about before, the commander told him. You need to think ahead. Level 4s are important now, but think ahead. Soon they'll all be obsolete. Your overvaluing of human life needs to change. If you can't do that, then your talent is useless. You don't need to send people to check it out, because the level 4s will soon return and tell us what happened. The lieutenant took a deep breath and nodded. I can change. He had all but given up on his humanity already. If he hadn't, he wouldn't have been able to capture survivors in order to gather test subjects for Stellar Technology. He had only ever viewed his troops as subordinates, never as individuals. He had learned to depersonalize them, so that he didn't feel guilt or remorse if something happened to them. The commander seemed to hear his thoughts, because he said, That's my last warning. The troops aren't your property, nor are they your private soldiers. You are just the person who helps us command them. Before the lieutenant could respond, the car that the commander was in exploded. The car was engulfed in flames and turned into a metal fireball. However, the commander managed to twist his way out of the wreckage. He rolled around to extinguish the flames on his body and emerged slowly from the sea of fire. He was approached by a black figure who had appeared from the burning building. Every step this man took ignited the ground into flame. Everyone who saw him was baffled. They asked a slew of questions amongst themselves. What's going on? Why did the fire dragon appear? Where are the paranormals? Should we run? At the sight of the powerful man who could summon fire dragons, the hearts of the Stellar Technology fighters filled with despair. Some of them turned to run away, but their colleagues scolded them. Don't run! If you run, we'll kill you as traitors! Some of the officers in charge of the groups tried to salvage the situation, calling their troops back to the battlefield. However, the morale of their makeshift soldiers had collapsed, and the leaders couldn't regain their loyalty. The commander looked at the stranger, who appeared to be walking on a red sea of fire. Sir, why don't you join us? The commander asked calmly. I represent a company that has the most advanced biological technology in the world. If you're this powerful now, just think how we could help you. However, the only answer he received from the dark figure was a ray of golden light. The commander clutched his neck in pain, but his struggles were useless. His eyes gradually dimmed. Charles stood in front of the commander and took his energy. He's a monster! One of the soldiers cried. When Charles slaughtered their leader, the entire Stellar Technology Army fell apart. Then a large-scale bombing began. Whenever anyone dared approach Charles to try a sneak attack, the last thing they ever saw was a colored light beneath their feet. Once Charles showed up, the battle didn't last long. By the time he had arrived, the fight was already coming to an end. Many of the people who had been fighting for stellar technology had been armed against their will. When faced with their commander's death and Charles's invincibility, they quickly surrendered, and both ordinary people and paranormals fled for their lives. He's a level 5 paranormal, they thought. Level 4 paranormals still had a fighting chance against a level 5. If they cooperated well, they might even have been able to kill him. However, these were level 3s who hadn't reached the peak of their order, and they were no more resistant to fire than ordinary people. Once Charles had killed and absorbed the energies of several paranormals, he stopped pursuing them. There were around 800 people left, and he couldn't chase them all. Besides, he thought, I had more important things to do. He knew that the Stellar Technology Army had all but collapsed. He decided to let the remaining troops flee. The two remaining teams that were attacking Miranda and the others braved Zack's fire and shot blindly into the flames. However, their momentum was much slower than they would have liked. They didn't know how many enemies they were up against, only that they were somewhere beyond the flames. Bullets seemed to appear from nowhere, taking out members of the Stellar Technology teams before they had a chance to see them. They don't seem to have very good marksmanship, someone shouted. I think they're just shooting at random. The others also noticed this. They considered that for all the bullets that had been fired, they hadn't taken many casualties. Most of the damage had been inflicted by the fire-powered paranormal. Let's go! One soldier shouted excitedly. Yeah, let's get rid of this trash! Another chimed in. An unknown number of enemies was a huge deterrent, even if it was only 20. But when they found out that their enemy wasn't as strong as they had initially thought, they regained their courage. It was true that the fire-powered paranormal had been troublesome, but he was only one man against two teams. Now that they had found their confidence, they began to look down on the enemy and charge forward. Led by two armored vehicles, they quickly approached Zack's team. However, they were quickly met with a huge crater in the ground. There's a hole here, one of them warned the others. Dale had used his earth power to create a hole in the ground. The earth fell away beneath the enemy soldiers, and many of them were lost. The students in Zack and Harper's team looked excited. Some of them even wanted to go out to see the carnage. Don't move, Harper ordered. Stay where you are and don't shoot. Anthony, protect everyone with your death spirits. Calvin, prepare to treat the wounded. Their attack had taken out the two armored vehicles, plunging them into deep chasms. And once the moment of panic passed, the Stellar Technology Army began to fire back. That's all they have, a Stellar Technology soldier cried in delight. They're obviously desperate, another said with a laugh. When they fired back, they decided to use an intense concentration of firepower. What they didn't expect was for there to be almost no resistance at all. The people hiding in the dark were suppressed by their firepower, to the point where they could barely raise their heads. This discovery excited the Stellar Technology Army. and they began to charge forward. But when they did, they were confronted by a figure wielding a sharp white sword. "Moonslash," Miranda cried. A sword beam that looked like a crescent moon swept through the air, and several of the Stellar Technology fighters were severed in two. When the others heard the screams, some of them stopped to look and found themselves in the path of Miranda's deadly sword. She held the blood-drinking sword in her hand and swept through the crowd, taking out several enemies at a time. Her Moonslash technique was undefeatable, and her enemies fell in droves. Her sword had been forged specially by Charles, and it was incredibly sharp. It had no equal, and it cut through steel like butter. During the battle against the Hive Queen, Miranda had felt that she and the sword had formed a special connection. It worked so efficiently for her that it was as if it had become an extension of her body. Her bond with the sword was the reason she had told Charles she wanted to keep it. She wasn't a pretentious person, but since she seemed to wield the weapon so well, she knew she could use it to protect Charles and the others. When she used the blood-drinking sword, even though the Moonslash technique only had the energy of an ordinary level 2 skill in her hands, it displayed the lethality of a level 4 skill. Among the Stellar Technology people, there wasn't even one peak level 3 person. Therefore, Miranda had no equal on the battlefield. Charles had sensed there were no experts among them, and it was for that reason he had given control of the battlefield to Miranda without worry. Her appearance in the battle had taken the enemy by surprise. No one had thought that someone would lay an ambush in the middle of the crossfire. If they had dug a trench, it may have been possible for them to take her out. But as it was, they were utterly taken aback. Regardless, someone opened fire in Miranda's direction. His teammates quickly rebuffed him. "Don't do that!" one cried. "Don't stop me," he replied. "Holy shit, what are you doing? You shot Ken! If we don't shoot, we're all going to die," he insisted. Miranda moved wildly through the crowd. Anyone who wanted to shoot her risked hitting their teammates, and those who engaged her in physical combat ran the risk of blocking the bullets with their own bodies. The crowd was her shield. But under the threat of death, most of them no longer cared about the repercussions. Many people with submachine guns only had one thought, and that was to kill her, even if it meant killing their own teammates. But the sudden onslaught of bullets made the paranormals stop in their tracks, afraid that they would be shot to death. "Paranormals, attack with all your strength," Harper ordered. Calvin and the others opened fire with all their might. Apart from Dale and Calvin, there were 3 paranormals among the students. However, their levels were low, and they still needed protection. That was why Miranda had initially rejected their request to follow her to the fortress. It had been a dangerous risk, and she hadn't been willing to gamble their lives. When they finally displayed their full force, pandemonium raged among the throngs of Stellar Technology soldiers. Huge meteorites fell from the sky, the ground split open and swallowed people whole. Hellfire roared across the battlefield, and beams of holy lights sucked the life right out of the enemy soldiers. Amid the fray were those who tried to restore order. "Everyone, don't panic! There aren't many of them! If we unite, we can defeat them!" But just as people began to listen, a fiery dragon swept through the sky. "It's the level 5 paranormal! Run!" one of the soldiers cried. Once Charles joined the battle, the Stellar Technology army rapidly dispersed. Level 5 paranormals weren't something they could deal with. They had no choice but to run for their lives. Surrounded on both sides, fewer than 100 people managed to escape. Charles killed some paranormals and absorbed their energy. Once he had dealt with them, he approached the cheering crowd of young people. They looked at him with admiration and broke out into praise. "He's back! Look at those cowards run! I bet he could have taken them all by himself. Yeah, he could take out a whole army." They were awestruck that he could inspire so much fear that an entire army had taken flight at the mere sight of him. "We don't have time to talk about it now," Charles said. "We need to get back to the base. There will be more teams on their way to fight Olivia and the others. We can't let the survival base fall." He called the whole team back together. Once they were all assembled, they made their way back to the survival base. When Charles and the others arrived back at the survival base, the assault on the base had already started. An endless array of gunshots mixed with cries for help rang out in the night, and flames flickered in the distance. Lena saw Charles and raced toward him. "Charles," she cried. "Are you okay? Are you hurt?" Acting instinctively, she hugged him. Although she hadn't forgiven him for his prior behavior, and her opinion of him was permanently tarnished, he was still her brother, and she would always worry for his safety. "I'm fine," he replied, "but it's not really time for hugging." She reluctantly released him. They were on a battlefield, and she knew it wasn't the place for emotion. She saw he wasn't injured, and that was enough to satisfy her for the time being. Then Charles and Miranda found Olivia. "What's the situation?" Charles asked her. "How many casualties?" "I haven't determined the casualties yet because a lot of people joined later on," she replied. "There are so many of us now, and many people have hidden in houses filled with their family members. We have more paranormals than them, I think, but the enemy is well equipped with weapons. I've deduced their plan is to send 4 groups to attack from every direction. Our weapons haven't been overly useful, and a few people have managed to hurt themselves." The Stellar Technology Army was very confident in their attack, so they had decided to split their forces. Charles had to admit that it was a good strategy, but he was certain they hadn't realized that he and his team had destroyed 2 of their groups already. He was aware of the problems with communication, and everything had happened so quickly that he doubted anyone had passed on the news of their comrades' defeat. He heaved a sigh of relief and said, "Okay, I'll go and build an energy shield." "All right," Olivia said. "How far behind are your pursuers? I'll arrange some snipers right away." "There aren't any," Charles said casually. "Except for some idiots who ran the wrong way. I don't think you can expect anyone else to be coming from this direction." Olivia was lost for words. "He took out all the enemies in that direction practically by himself," Miranda told her quietly as Charles walked off. "You just need to keep watch the other way." She paused until he was out of earshot. Then she added, "Since he woke up, I feel like his strength has increased. Zach and the others did a bit back there, but I think it's possible Charles could have done it without us. If we were to face the Hive Queen again, I believe he'd be able to take it out on his own." Olivia was stunned. He defeated a whole team? She thought. Did he take out an army with heavy firepower just like that? When she looked at the flames in the distance, she knew there was nothing unbelievable about Miranda's story. She knew that if anyone could accomplish something like that, it was Charles. She wondered vaguely whether there was any story about him that she would doubt. After a brief moment of shock, she quickly regained her composure. Since Charles and Miranda had said that the enemy had been taken care of, she saw little reason to doubt them. All she needed to do was arrange a solid defense. She was glad she could focus her attention on the enemies coming from only 2 directions. While the war raged, Charles developed his energy shield. There were over 20,000 people in the Dawn Alliance, and more than 10,000 of them had followed him before the Hive Queen battle. He also had to account for the approved non-combatants in their numbers. It was possible for over 20,000 people to be accommodated within a single area in the base. The people in the 2 towns nearby had been killed by the Neals when George had been the head of the family. Therefore, theoretically, it was possible for the people of the Dawn Alliance to use the existing houses until the new residences were built. However, that had not ended up being the case. The original 10,000 people who had been with Charles before the appearance of the Hive Queen had originally coexisted comfortably. They had seen Charles's strength before, and most of them were grateful and loyal to him. He had protected them and risked his life against the most powerful monster many of them had ever seen. But the people who had come into the Alliance after the Hive Queen had been defeated were more unpredictable. They had no confirmed loyalty to Charles, and they had no reason to pledge their allegiance to him. Subsequently, many paranormals who were confident in their own strength had formed groups of their own and had started to recruit people, creating splinter groups around the base. Many of the rogue paranormals considered the martial artists who practiced cultivation techniques to be useful only as target practice. These rogue fighters had only ended up in the Alliance because, once they had realized they didn't have the ability to face a real disaster on their own, some of them had joined the army, and others had gone running to Charles. The Dawn Alliance was a powerful civilian organization, and they had known that if they joined it, they might have more authority. Some of them had even thought, under the right circumstances, they might even get the opportunity to seize power. Although it was unlikely, they thought it was possible. The Alliance leaders had divided the new people into other existing groups, and their residences were spread out among the base. When Stellar Technology had attacked without warning, Olivia had investigated the newcomers. What Charles wanted to do was prioritize his own loyal people. About 20 minutes after he had reappeared at the base, Charles completed his protective shield. Within that time, Olivia's forces had successfully pushed the enemy back. Charles didn't plan to confront the enemy directly. After all, it was too difficult to replicate the circumstances of his previous battle, and he had used almost all his soul energy. Building an energy shield wasn't an easy task, and even Charles found it difficult to build one large enough to cover his desired area. Fortunately, once the shield was up, he knew he would be able to rest. Before he did so, though, he gave his orders. "I left 4 exits in the shield," he said. "They'll all need to be guarded. There are also 36 resting points. If the enemy uses cannons to attack the energy shield, let the paranormals replenish their energy at one of those points. They're easy enough to operate. You should have access to paranormal memories that will teach you how to use them." The reason he wanted to leave some exits was to create a deliberate flaw in the defense. The exits created a natural weak spot that would draw the enemy's attention. Although the number of paranormals in the Dawn Alliance wasn't insignificant, they were no match for Stellar Technology. If there were clear exits, the enemy would naturally target them, try to breach the base. Only after they had suffered enough losses would they turn their attention to the protective shield itself. Charles knew that destroying the protective shield wasn't impossible. However, it would place more pressure on the Dawn Alliance's soldiers. The group of soldiers nodded. When they had awakened, it had come with simple knowledge of how to use their superpowers. They knew about energy protection, but none of them were capable of using it. Since the energy shield was in place, they could use the resting points to replenish their energy. Olivia was a little worried. If they use too much energy, won't that place them at a disadvantage in future battles? The other members of the Alliance shared their concern. "It doesn't matter," Charles said. "We're in the middle of an ambush. It's either that, or we battle directly against heavy firepower. They can afford to use some energy." Seeing Olivia was still inclined to argue, Charles waved his hand. "Let me recover my strength," he said. He retreated to a room on his own and took out some medicinal crystal cores to help him recover his strength. "You heard him," Miranda said to the other paranormals. "We have no reason to doubt him." "That's right," Zach agreed. "If Charles says it's safe, then it is." None of them showed any fear, despite the fact they were fighting a huge army by themselves. Although the enemy consisted of paranormals, the Alliance still had a great deterrent in the form of the energy shield. "Guard the 4 exits," Olivia ordered. "If anyone tries to enter, shoot to kill. I don't want even a mouse getting through that shield. Anyone below level 3, get into position to protect the shield. Those at level 3 or above, save your strength for the fight." She knew that in order to protect them against the enemy's attack, it was imperative that soldiers had at least reached level 3. On her command, everyone divided into their allocated positions. Kevin took the Neal family and his newly recruited personal guards to one of the exits. The military guarded another, and the remaining 2 were under Olivia's command. Lena wanted to participate in the battle, but Miranda ordered her to stay by Charles's side. While Charles recovered, the battle went into full swing. Initially, the Alliance members had confidence in the shield. When Stellar Technology brought out a huge cannon, a few of the new people had a change of heart and thought their defense might not be strong enough. Some prepared to flee for their lives. Most of those who had joined the Dawn Alliance because they were afraid of danger hid in a corner, shivering with fear and waiting for the guns to fire. However, those people were in the minority. Some of the stronger members saw their cowering colleagues and looked at them in dismay and disappointment. They were annoyed that the show of cowardice might jeopardize their counterattack. Some of the smaller groups that had been relying on the numbers made up by the cowards had no choice but to find a relatively safe corner and try to avoid the enemy's assault. Some of the cowards were bold enough to hide behind the exits or in places that were easy to ambush. They had lived through the bug swarm attack, and though they didn't have the courage to fight directly, they still had a certain amount of experience at avoiding danger. Due to the number of cowards who were jostling for places to hide, the enemy soon noticed the dissent among the Alliance. "What a waste," one of the Stellar Technology leaders drawled. "You survived this long only to die at our hands." Some of the Stellar Technology leaders positively beamed with excitement when they saw the frightened Alliance members. They even started calculating how much credit they could get by capturing so many survivors and what that might mean for their chances of improving their strength. One of the Stellar Technology soldiers shouted to the Alliance members using a loudspeaker, "Listen up, everyone! We haven't come here to kill you. We want to take you to a safe place. As long as you come out obediently and follow our instructions, I guarantee that you'll be fine." When the cowardly Alliance members heard the offer, several of them could feel their hearts pounding. Not only because they believed what the soldiers said, but because they knew if they hid, they would only face death. They wondered whether there might be a way out if they surrendered. The man with the loudspeaker continued to shout, "I was once a survivor like you. I was saved by Stellar Technology when I was running from a zombie. Then, I was given all my equipment, including guns. If you're willing to surrender, you can become one of us, as long as you accept our identity test." Dozens of people emerged from their hiding places. They opened their arms wide and shouted at the people from Stellar Technology, "We're willing to surrender! We want guns!" The soldiers from Stellar Technology quickly arranged a place for them, an underground parking garage. The deserters were locked up, but they weren't given guns. They were guarded by several people who pointed their own guns at them and confiscated the deserters as weapons. One of the guards comforted the imprisoned traitors. "You don't have to worry," she said. "We used to be like you. As long as you're obedient, you can become our comrades and fight with us. You'll also get enough food and water." As she spoke, another soldier began to distribute food and water among them. "Lying pigs," one of the captives yelled. "You said if we surrender, we'd get guns. Give us back our weapons." "Yeah," another agreed. "You lied to us." The rest began shouting, "You scammers! We're soldiers! Let us out! Give us guns!" They fell silent when a gunshot rang out.